Okay, welcome back. This is Chapter 9, and Chapter 9 is all about filling in a form on the web. I know everyone's done this, right? You've gone to some place where you're buying something on Amazon, and you fill in your name and your address. You fill out this form, and then you hit a little button or something that submits that data to their server. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna create a fill in a blank form that sends something off to a server. Now, we don't actually have a server per se, so we're going to use the one that's provided by the author of the book. It's just kind of like a demo. All right, so as always, we're going to start with the learning objective. So go to page 399, and you'll see, describe the common uses of forms on a web page. Well, I almost covered that already. Create forms using the form input, text area, and select elements. Create forms that provide additional accessibility. Associate form controls with labels, field set, and legends. Create custom image buttons. Well, I don't know about creating the image button. Well, we'll use an image button. Use CSS to style a form. Yep. Configure the new HTML5 controls. Describe the features and common uses of server-side processing. And invoke server-side processing to handle the data. Yep. And find free server-side processing. That's not really practical, and I'll explain why when we get there. So, to make this work, it should be fairly obvious that it takes two to tango, so to speak. That whenever you have a fill-in-a-blank form, it's going to be the web page, which is going to be the form part, and then somewhere else, some server-side component is going to be the recipient of this data. And so it's a little weird. We're only going to be doing half of the equation. So we're not going to be able to see the whole picture here. All right, so file, like I always do, new project. Come on, machine. I got a video to do here. Come on. There you go, good. So I hit the button, and finally get to the point where we can start. Okay. So just the way I always do, I'm just going to go in here and say add, and I'm going to create me a thing here, and I'm going to call it index the way I always do. Okay, cool. Now, so to start with, the first thing we need to do is talk about the form element. So yes, there is an element in here called form. And so the form element basically is the thing that sets this thing up, that makes it look like a fill-in-the-blank form. Okay? First of all, let me just put some stuff in here, like hello. All right, let's see what this thing looks like, and what does the form element do for me right off the bat? Well, you can probably imagine the form element does nothing for me right off the bat. It has no visual elements at all. Okay? And that's okay. Alright. So there's some attributes there on the table 9.1, page 401. And I'm going to go through a lot of these in detail, and we're going to skip a bunch. The first one is the action. So inside my web page, I need to tell it what happens when you fill in the blank and then hit the submit button. What happens? And so this could be, I want you to send all this data that you've collected, send it off to some server somewhere, and have it, process my order for Beanie Babies or whatever it is that I'm doing. Or it could be like a JavaScript thing that happens. I mean, there's lots and lots of choices, which we're not really going to deal with. So we're just going to say that, yeah, magic happens on the server, trust me, okay? So we are going to have an action attribute here. We're going to add one in just a minute. In our case, we're going to use the URL to the author's website. There's an attribute here called autocomplete. And we're talking about, if you have a password field and you want it to, so whenever you get to that point, it automatically just, the browser itself provides the information to, fill in the blank for you. You type the word, Bob, and it goes, that's your first name. So it fills out all the rest. That's what that's for. The next one is called method. And this is slightly technical. But there are two different methods for sending data over the web. So I have this thing rendered in my browser on my machine, and I fill in some information, I hit submit. There's two techniques you can do. The original technique was a system called GET. Okay, just G-E-T, GET. And there was a lot of problems with it. First of all, what it would do, it would send all your data on the URL itself. In other words, you could look at the browser URL if you were receiving this and see everything. And all that is sent out in the open. It's not encrypted. And there's some significant limit on the amount of data you can put on a single URL. So that kind of fell out of favor. So the other one is called POST. And again, not trying to get into technical details, but what it does is it has the ability to encrypt the data and send it inside the page itself. So it's not on the URL, it's actually inside the page that gets sent. Okay. The default is the old technique. The default, if you do not specify a method attribute here, then yeah, it's going to use the old. I'm going to go ahead, what the heck, I'm going to go ahead and do this. So I'm going to say action. Sound like I'm a movie producer, and I don't like to type, so I'm just going to grab this guy and put him right there. And then I have to tell the method. And in this case, I do not want the get. Okay. So those are the two things that we need to be able to get this thing going. Woo! Okay. The next one talks about ID and name. And here's a weird scenario. And it's going to look weird, but there's a naming convention that's used inside my web page for me, okay? And that is the ID. And then there's another naming convention that's not used by me at all. It's used by the server at the other end, and that's the name. So in almost all the cases, when we come up, we're going to have, like, let's say you have a field for your first name. It's going to say ID equals first name, name is equal to first name. It's like the ID and the name are almost always going to be the same, and they're almost always required. Isn't that crazy? So the name version, and you'll see this when we get going, the name version is just for the guys at the other end. And if you leave off the name, we'll show you that, what happens if you leave off the name. So the way it works is, each one of these, like a text box, where you fill in, there's a value associated with, you type in Bob. And so there's a name value pair. So what gets sent to the other end is the name attribute that says first name, and then the text Bob. So name and value pair. That's what gets sent. If you leave off the name, it will not send Bob to the other end. Okay, I'll explain this a little bit more when we get to it. Okay? Whew. All right. So the first element that we need to talk about is the input element. And unfortunately, well, I don't know about unfortunately, but input has an awful lot of features. I mean, so we're going to talk about the input element in individual chunks. The simplest type of input element is one called text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say hello. Actually, I'll change this. Let's say first name, colon. Cool. And then I'm going to do an input guy. All right? Cool. Input. I need to tell what type of input this is. So there is a type attribute. And there's a bunch of these guys. Okay? But I just want to start with the one called text, because that's kind of the simplest one. Okay, cool. So let me just run this, and we'll see what it looks like. And so, it looks like a form, doesn't it? It asks me for my first name, and I have a place to submit Bob. Okay, isn't that pretty cool? Now, I don't really have a submit button yet or anything like that, but that kind of worked. So I'm just going to leave it like that. I'm not going to put in the ID, and I'm not going to put in the name on purpose. Okay, on purpose, just to show you what happens. So, let's say I want to do another one, like last name. So right off the bat, do you think this is a block tag, which means they're going to go like this? Or is this an inline tag, which means they're going to go like that? What do you think it's going to be? Let's see. They're inlines. So if you want these things to appear like a normal form, you're going to have to go in here and basically throw in some breaks or something. Okay? So it's very, very common that in a form you'll see a bunch of these little breaks. Okay, one more time. So I'm trying to line these guys up. And don't worry about making them physically line up, you know, this way, because we're going to have an awful lot more to do about that in just a minute. Okay, so now I have two text boxes. What happens if I wanted to put some default text inside my text box? Like, I don't know, this is kind of a stupid example, but let's just assume one of the things you could do, whoops, if I get inside here. Remember I told you about the value thing? Remember that? So value, I'm going to say, it's going to pre-fill in the box for me. How's that? So it's going to start with Bob. I mean, you don't have to leave it at Bob. You can go in there and change to Jane, but I'm just saying that's the way to provide a default value. Now, this one doesn't have a value thing, but whatever gets typed in becomes that value. All right? So, cool. All right. So, let's look at the attributes. So there's a table 9.2 on page 402, and there's a bunch of these guys. The first one is the type. Well, since we're talking about the text type, that's the one we're talking about now. We'll talk about just the attributes that are appropriate to that. One of them is size, and the size is how many characters wide you want this box. And this is not exactly rocket science. It's not, you know, because the size of a character, if you had what's called a monospace font, where the letter W is just, the capital W is just as wide as the lowercase I, okay? Then you say, oh, well, I want it to be exactly 25 characters. But in almost every scenario where the letters width are not, you know, uniformly wide, then how many characters? I mean, I would have preferred pixels, but they didn't ask me. But I can go in here and basically say I want this size. And so for the last name, I'm going to say size equals 50. So 50 characters. Let's see what that looks like. Cool. Now, is this going to prevent me from typing beyond that? In other words, what if my name is longer than 50 characters? Is that okay? Yeah. You just won't be able to see it all. It'll work. It'll be, you type in your big long name and send it off to the server. It will work. You just won't be able to see it all. Okay. So maybe there is a thing that you want to limit. No, not only do I want not to just want to make the thing bigger, I want to limit on the number of characters you can type in. Well, that's the next one, the max length. Let's say, for example, I'm going to go here. Oh, this is actually pretty cool. I'm going to go and say max length is equal to 3, okay? I'm going to get rid of Bob here. Now, this is kind of weird. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So I told it the maximum length that will accept is 3. Well, at least I think that's what I said. So I type John is so yeah, it only allowed me to type in 3 letters. Cool. Now you use this a lot. Like if I have a database on the other end of this thing and I have a fixed width field in my database, like for example in my database design, I said that first names and last names can be no more than 50. Wouldn't it make sense to go ahead and put that into form so that you wouldn't have to worry about when you send it to the database it has to truncate off the end? Okay, this is a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.